Baldur's Gate 3 has been taking the gaming industry by storm, achieving far more success than its creators at Larian Studios even expected. In the first few weeks since the game released, it has received practically unanimous praise and has hit all kinds of sales records on Steam. The game has been receiving a ton of praise over Larian's dedication to deliver a complete, full gaming experience in an era where even some of the biggest gaming studios seem to constantly release rushed and unfinished products. An era where paid DLC runs rampant, and I just think it's super refreshing to see a game like Baldur's Gate do so well and receive so much attention. Before the game released, the most I really saw of anybody talking about this game online was the somewhat infamous bear scene. But I don't really want to dive too deep down that rabbit hole. But yeah, outside of that, I didn't really see a whole lot of buzz about the game. For me, it's been a game that I've been looking forward to for a couple of years now. And while I did not check out the game during its lengthy early access period, it's a game I've been keeping an eye on for a while. Now guys, I love RPGs. If you watched any of my videos, you probably already get that, but while I've mostly been covering Final Fantasy and Japanese role-playing games, I absolutely adore a ton of Western RPGs as well. My favorite ones? Well, probably the older BioWare games. Well, I think most gamers are at least familiar with Mass Effect. Before that series became the huge success it was, before BioWare got bought out by EA, they released several of what I would consider to be the best games of all time. You got Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, a sci-fi based role-playing game in the you guys know Star Wars, and of course, Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Origins is somewhat of a spiritual successor to their own Baldur's Gate series, which was made without the D&D license and in its own fantasy world instead of a Forgotten Realms setting. But these games aren't even really my first experience with BioWare. You see, when I was a young, crazy child, I had one of those cool uncles. And said cool uncle introduced me to the world of PC gaming. Diablo, Warcraft, and of course, Baldur's Gate. Now, I'm sure I barely understood what was going on in any of these games, but they certainly looked cool, they looked mature and violent, and it certainly left an impression on me, and honestly, it's probably what sparked my interest in gaming in general. Now, over the years I caught up on a lot of these games, and I loved them all, but Baldur's Gate has probably been the hardest one to get into. Released in 1998, and with a sequel following in 2002, these are games that definitely show their age, but they can still be a fantastic experience, especially if you are fond of BioWare's later work. As you can see in these games, it really laid down the foundation for so much of their other work. It's just Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, they are a little old looking, they're really challenging, and they do use an outdated edition of D&D rules that can be kind of confusing. They're great games, but they can be kind of hard to approach these days. But anyway, unlike Mass Effect or Dragon Age, Baldur's Gate is based on an existing IP, and a really big one at that. The Baldur's Gate series takes place in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting of the super popular tabletop role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons. And guys, we can't ignore that the D&D stuff has been going absolutely bonkers lately, with tons of popular video series, podcasts, there was even that movie that just came out, and yeah, overall it just feels like this is probably the right timing for Baldur's Gate 3. I probably couldn't have come out at a better time. So maybe that's helping create this perfect storm for Baldur's Gate 3 to come in and really steal the show. But stealing the show, it is certainly doing, and in a year where we've already gotten huge games from Zelda to Final Fantasy, I can't believe it, but Baldur's Gate 3 is really coming out swinging. Critics and fans alike, everyone seems to be loving it. But why is this game such a big deal? Well, for me, it really does come down to the fact that RPGs like this simply aren't being made anymore. At least, not on this scale. BioWare still does make games, of course, but that company is a literal shell of what they used to be. The people that created those old games, they don't work there anymore. They've moved on, and EA has proven time and time again that they don't really know or care what the fans of Dragon Age want to see, and as far as Mass Effect, I don't even know what they're cooking up with that series. But enough complaining about the current state of BioWare. After all, it's not even BioWare that's handling the third entry of the Baldur's Gate series. Instead, it's Larian Studios who are taking the helm at this one. Honestly, it's probably for the better that someone else is handling the D&D license, and Larian is a studio that has been doing really great things over the last couple of years. It's through their own RPG series, Divinity: Original Sin, that Larian proved to so many that they were a studio capable of doing justice to Baldur's Gate. And that's not to say that I think that Divinity or Divinity: Original Sin 2 are perfect games, or far from it, but for fans of the old Baldur's Gate games, Icewind Dale, or any of those old CRPGs, I think it showed that there still is hope for the genre, and that the crew over at Larian had the best shot at pulling off the next Baldur's Gate. For me, Divinity is maybe a little too on the silly side, and the combat, while I do think it's good, I think it focuses way too much on the terrain stuff, and it just overall can be kind of cheap at times. I do know that some people really like it, so that's maybe more of a personal taste thing, but even then, I can definitely say I enjoyed the game quite a bit. So yeah, when I found out that it would be Larian doing Baldur's Gate 3, I was definitely excited to see Larian's take on the D&D stuff, but I was also nervous about a few things, and how serious the tone would be, and of course, the gameplay. But I'll say both of these things are done very well. And the whole game is done very well, but I guess we'll just kind of cover the big stuff, right? So, the tone of Baldur's Gate is perfectly dark, while still open to a little bit of the ridiculousness that goes along with Dungeons & Dragons. And after you've created your ideal protagonist from a wide variety of races and classes, subclasses, etc., you're immediately thrown into the action. Your character awakens on a Mind Flayer ship, and you quickly find yourself attempting to escape, and of course, you do, but unfortunately, a little piece of that Mind Flayer has found its way into your brain, and you, along with a few other party members of the same unfortunate situation, must find a way to get these Mind Flayer tadpoles out of your brains before the parasites take control, and they all become Mind Flayers themselves. So, it's a pretty great setup. But just like the RPGs that influenced this game, so much of the experience of the game comes from just exploring the world and seeing what kind of crazy situations you'll run into along the journey. And of course, how you interact in these situations. And, you've also got to pick the brain of your companions and find out what makes them tick. And yeah, you can also fuck them. Yeah, it's been pretty great. Right now, I'm just finishing up Act 1, so I'm sure that I'm in for quite a bit more chaos, but I've been kind of taking my sweet time, making sure I explore every corner of the map and find every little side story that I can, and it's just been fantastic. It does exactly what I love about this genre so well. Every encounter can be handled in a wide variety of ways. Maybe you're like playing a good guy paladin, high charisma build, and you want to sweet talk or intimidate your way to success. You can do that. Or maybe you just want to go in swinging and be a evil murder hobo of death and kill everyone and everything in your path. You can definitely do that too. And there's room for anything in between. So, it's been very cool to see. I definitely think it's the kind of game that's going to be encouraging multiple playthroughs. I've almost restarted it a few times. Well, I have restarted it a few times. I think I've made maybe 3 characters so far. But yeah, as I've mentioned, you got these party members, right? So let's go back to these guys. You got a wide variety of companions to join you on your journey. And depending on what kind of character you are playing, they might not like you right away, or, you might not like them right away. I don't want to spoil anything too big, but there is a party member who kind of crossed a line for me, so I killed their ass with no regrets. And I love that Baldur's Gate is a game ambitious enough to let you do things like that. The game is set up to be your story and let you handle things the way you want to. Now, as far as the gameplay goes, unlike the first 2 Baldur's Gate games, which kind of operated in a real-time, pausable, hybrid thing, Baldur's Gate 3 is fully turn-based. And personally, I think this works way better than the combat from the first couple games. Every turn can be as meaningful or strategic as you need it to be, and there are so many crazy things you can pull off. I'm still learning a whole lot, but I really like it. So, the game is based off of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm not going to lie, if you're not already somewhat familiar with Dungeons & Dragons classes, spells, abilities, stuff like that, well then there is going to be quite a big learning curve. And unlike a lot of other video game RPGs, every level up in Dungeons & Dragons means a lot. And you don't get very many of them. The level cap is 12 for this game, and as I mentioned, every single level up, especially if you aren't too familiar with the Dungeons & Dragons rules, gives you a lot to pick from. How you want to customize your abilities or spells or whatever. So as far as that goes, you know, it might be a little bit overwhelming for people unfamiliar with the D&D stuff, but I think as long as you look up some stuff online and do a little bit of research, you could probably figure it out all right. I do think that Larian did an amazing job at bringing the Dungeons & Dragons classes to life. You'll find a huge variety in playstyles from class to class. So far, I'd say that Barbarian has probably been the most fun for me. Throwing enemies around at each other as a bonus action is just too good. But yeah, I'm excited to see how some of these classes work at later levels, especially the more spell-oriented classes. Of course, there's so much more I could get into here with the gameplay, but if I'm going to explain all the classes of Dungeons & Dragons, we're going to be here for a very long time. I'll just say that the gameplay is spectacular, and I can't really think of many ways that Larian could have done a better job at making a Dungeons & Dragons combat system. It just is so much fun to play. But I think a lot of the discourse around this game, at least what I'm seeing lately, hasn't really been about how or why the game is so good, but rather focusing on how other gaming studios are reacting towards Baldur Gate's success. Yeah, I mean, I guess it is kind of amusing to see employees of other studios chime in on the game, make up excuses as to why other gaming companies can't or won't make games of the same level, trying to dismiss the reasons as to why Baldur's Gate 3 is doing so well. And I think when it comes down to it, Baldur's Gate's success is pretty simple. It's a great RPG, released in an era where fans of the genre have been hungry for something like this for a very long time. Larian made sure to pay attention to what RPG fans like and what they dislike about the genre. And while I wouldn't exactly say that Baldur's Gate is creating new grounds for fantasy games, it's kind of taking everything that was so great about Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age or making it all just a lot bigger and better and more modern. It's just so much fun to play. No bullshit, just good, solid gameplay and a great story to go along with it. And yeah, Dungeons & Dragons seems more popular than ever, so seems like a simple path to success for me. Anyway, I would highly recommend this game to anyone who likes those old BioWare games, or anyone curious about D&D, or even just fans of strategic turn-based combat. I mean, there's a lot to love in this game, and if that kind of stuff sounds good to you, then I think you'll love this game as well.